The avoidance breaking point, when their walls come crashing down, we all know someone who seems like a fortress. Hard to reach. Emotionally elusive, you get close, they pull away. You show love, they deflect. You ask for connection and they vanish behind a joke or silence. These are the avoidance people who've built walls not out of arrogance or indifference, but out of fear. Fear of vulnerability. Fear of being hurt. Fear of needing someone. But here's what's not often said. Avoidants are not heartless. In fact, many of them feel deeply, perhaps too deeply. That's why they protect themselves so fiercely. But what happens when life pushes them to the edge? When their usual strategies no longer work? When they meet someone who doesn't chase, doesn't beg, but stands strong in their own worth? That's when the breaking point comes. And it's not loud, it's quiet. It looks like a long stare into the mirror. A moment where their loneliness hits like a tidal wave. A time when even they can't deny that something inside is begging to be let out, to be seen, to be loved. This isn't about blaming the avoidant. It's about understanding that no one escapes the need for connection, not forever. And the truth is, when those walls come down, it's not the dramatic moment you see in movies. It's a series of small, raw choices, answering a text instead of ghosting, saying I miss you instead of pretending they're fine, letting themselves be held just for a moment without pulling away. And for the people loving them from a distance, your job is not to tear their walls down. It's to show them by your presence, not your pursuit, that love doesn't mean losing yourself. It means finding someone worth letting the walls down for. Avoidance build emotional walls out of fear, not a lack of feeling. On the surface, they may seem indifferent, cold, or even selfish, but underneath that exterior lies a person who likely feels too much, not too little. Their distance is often a deeply ingrained coping mechanism and emotional reflex shaped by past experiences where vulnerability was met with pain, rejection, or neglect. They may have grown up in environments where emotional expression wasn't safe or where relying on others led to disappointment. As a result, they've learned to rely solely on themselves, equating closeness with danger and independence with safety. When you interact with an avoidant person, it can feel like they're always one step away from being truly present. They might be charming and engaging one moment, then distant and unavailable the next. It's confusing because it feels like there's connection, real, meaningful moments where you catch glimpses of who they are beneath the surface. But just when you think the walls are down, they go up again, sometimes higher than before. This push-pull dynamic isn't about manipulation. It's about protection. It's how they maintain control over their emotions, how they stop themselves from feeling too exposed. What makes it more complicated is that avoidants often don't recognize this behavior in themselves. To them, pulling back feels natural, even logical. When they sense a relationship deepening, instead of feeling safe, their internal alarm system gets triggered. Intimacy equals risk. Vulnerability equals loss. So they detach not because they don't care, but because caring feels overwhelming. It's easier to retreat than to risk the emotional chaos that closeness might bring. This is why trying to appeal to their emotions or reason with them often doesn't work. You can't love someone out of avoidance. You can't convince them to tear down walls they believe are keeping them safe. It has to come from them, from a place of inner readiness to confront what those walls are really built on. That realization usually comes slowly, often after a series of failed connections or moments of intense self-reflection. Sometimes it comes from meeting someone who doesn't chase or demand, but who quietly holds their ground, creating a safe emotional space without pressure. This is why trying to appeal to their emotions or reason with them often doesn't work. You can't love someone out of avoidance. You can't convince them to tear down walls they believe are keeping them safe. It has to come from them, from a place of inner readiness to confront what those walls are really built on. That realization usually comes slowly, often after a series of failed connections or moments of intense self-reflection. Sometimes it comes from meeting someone who doesn't chase or demand, but who quietly holds their ground, creating a safe emotional space without pressure. Understanding that avoidance is rooted in fear shifts the way we approach these dynamics. Instead of labeling someone as emotionally unavailable or distant, we begin to see the deeper layers, the wounds they're protecting, the fears they haven't yet faced. And while it's not our job to heal them, compassion can replace frustration. Patience can replace pressure. And with time, they might feel safe enough to question whether the walls that once protected them are now the very thing keeping them from the connection they crave. Deep down, breaking point often comes in quiet. Personal moments, not dramatic scenes. It's a common misconception that people with avoidant tendencies experience transformation in sudden, cinematic ways: a grand confession, a passionate chase through the rain, or an emotional outburst that finally shatters the emotional armor. In reality, the breaking point of an avoidant individual is usually subtle, internal, and deeply personal. It doesn't look like an explosion. It looks like a slow unraveling, often happening when no one is watching. Avoidants live in a state of emotional management. They monitor how close others get, keep relationships at arm's length, and regulate vulnerability like a thermostat, never letting it get too warm. But over time, something starts to shift. They begin to notice the same patterns repeating themselves. The relationships that don't last, the people they push away, the emptiness that follows moments when connection was offered and they chose withdrawal instead. These realizations accumulate slowly, often pushed into the background by distraction or rationalization. But they don't disappear. They sit there quietly stacking up, waiting to be acknowledged. The actual breaking point might come during an otherwise ordinary day. Maybe it's a Sunday afternoon when no one texts back, and for the first time, they realize how alone they truly feel. Maybe it's in the silence after they end yet another relationship that never had a chance to deepen. Or maybe it's in a moment of vulnerability, someone looks at them with genuine love, and instead of feeling safe, they feel panic. That panic doesn't go away. And they begin to question why. Why is closeness so terrifying? Why does something that looks like love feel like danger? This is the quiet crack in the wall. The moment they can't rationalize away their own behavior anymore, they begin to see that the protection they've clung to for so long has become a prison. What once kept them safe now keeps them isolated. This moment can be painful. It often involves grief for the connections they've sabotaged, for the time lost behind emotional defenses, for the love they didn't let themselves receive. It's rarely obvious to the outside world. Friends and partners might not even notice it happening. Avoidants don't usually come running back with teary apologies or grand declarations. Instead, they withdraw deeper for a while, processing, questioning, confronting the inner beliefs that have shaped their choices. And when they do begin to change, it's in small ways, reaching out when they'd normally disappear, choosing to sit in discomfort rather than escape, admitting they miss someone even if it terrifies them. These quiet moments of reckoning are powerful, even if they go unnoticed. They mark the beginning of something new. Not a dramatic transformation, but a shift of willingness to face what's been avoided for so long. And while no one else may see it happening, it's often the most significant turning point of all. Emotional growth starts with small, vulnerable acts. For someone with avoidant tendencies, vulnerability doesn't feel natural. In fact, it often feels like a threat, like stepping into a room with no exit, no shield, and no way to retreat. That's because their wiring tells them that closeness equals loss of control. Letting someone in means exposing themselves to pain, disappointment, or rejection. So they don't leap into vulnerability. They edge into it inch by inch through small decisions that, to an outsider, might seem insignificant but are actually monumental. Something as simple as replying to a message instead of ignoring it can be an act of courage for an avoidant person. Following through on plans instead of canceling at the last minute can be their way of saying, I'm still here, even though this feels scary. Asking a partner how they're feeling or admitting when they've had a hard day might not seem like grand gestures, but they are the building blocks of emotional connection. The key is consistency over intensity. Grand gestures often collapse under the weight of expectation, especially for someone who's never learned to feel secure in emotional closeness. But steady, repeatable, small steps, those are sustainable. Those can rewire a person's sense of what's safe, what's possible, and what kind of love they can give and receive. Over time, those tiny acts begin to shift the emotional baseline. Vulnerability goes from feeling like exposure to feeling like courage. Intimacy stops being something to avoid and starts being something to trust. It's also important to understand that for avoidance, backtracking is part of the process. They may open up one day and retreat the next. They may feel deeply connected in one moment and then need space to recalibrate. That doesn't mean growth isn't happening. It means the emotional muscles are still developing. Just like learning any new skill, there will be missteps, resistance, and moments of doubt. But every time they choose to lean in, even just a little, they're proving to themselves that they can do what once felt impossible. These small acts are how the walls begin to come down, not all at once, but brick by brick. Vulnerability in its most transformative form doesn't arrive with a bang. It arrives quietly through choices that seem ordinary but are, in reality, revolutionary. Loving and avoidance and requires strength, not sacrifice. When you're in a relationship with someone who has avoidant tendencies, it's easy to believe that love means proving your loyalty, waiting patiently in the background, or continuously accommodating their emotional distance. But that kind of love, one built on self-sacrifice and diminishing your needs, doesn't foster growth for either person. The truth is, loving someone who struggles with vulnerability doesn't mean you should lose yourself in the process. It means showing up with emotional strength, clear boundaries, and a deep understanding of your own value. Avoidants are often drawn to partners who are consistent and emotionally grounded because, consciously or not, they're seeking safety, someone who won't overwhelm them, but also won't abandon them. However, there's a fine line between being emotionally stable and becoming emotionally invisible. If you constantly bend to accommodate their fears, hide your own needs, or suppress your feelings to avoid conflict, the relationship becomes imbalanced. Instead of being a source of mutual support and growth, it becomes a one-sided effort to keep the peace, often at your own expense. Emotional strength in this context means being able to hold space for their discomfort without taking responsibility for it. It's being able to say, I understand that you need space right now, but I also need consistency in communication. It's choosing not to chase when they pull away, but also not punishing them for it. It's understanding the difference between patience and self-abandonment. True strength is knowing when to give grace and when to walk away, not out of anger, but out of respect for yourself. You are not responsible for their healing. You can support them, but you can't fix them. That belief that if you love them hard enough, they'll change can lead you down a path of emotional depletion. It turns love into a project where their transformation becomes your goal. But people don't change because someone else wants them to. They change when they're ready to face their own walls. Your job is not to tear those walls down. It's to stand on the other side with a calm, steady presence and let them decide if they want to meet you there. What often helps an avoidant grow is not someone who tries harder, loves louder, or proves they'll never leave. What helps is someone who respects themselves enough to set boundaries, communicate clearly, and walk away if the relationship becomes emotionally unsafe. That's the paradox. The more grounded you are in your own worth, the safer you become for someone who's terrified of closeness. Because you're not asking them to complete you or validate you, simply inviting them into a space where mutual respect, emotional responsibility, and real intimacy can exist. Loving an avoidant then becomes an act of both compassion and courage. Compassion to understand their wounds and courage to not let their wounds become yours. It's not about breaking down their defenses. It's about holding your ground and showing by example what healthy connection truly looks like. No1 escapes the need for connection forever. Even the most emotionally guarded, the ones who pride themselves on their independence and self-sufficiency, eventually encounter moments where the illusion of emotional detachment begins to crack. Human beings are wired for connection biologically, psychologically, and emotionally. It's not a flaw or a weakness. It's a fundamental part of who we are. And while some people learn to suppress that need, to bury it under layers of avoidance and rationality, it never truly disappears. It waits quietly, often hidden beneath busyness, distraction, or emotional distance, but it's always there. Avoidants often believe that they can outgrow or outsmart their need for others. They tell themselves stories like, "I'm better off alone," or "needing people makes you weak." These beliefs aren't formed in a vacuum. They usually come from early experiences where connection felt unsafe, inconsistent, or painful. So in an effort to protect themselves, they build emotional walls. They lean on logic rather than vulnerability, independence rather than intimacy. They become masters of self-reliance, convincing themselves they don't need anyone, that they can manage life better when their heart isn't involved. But over time, life finds a way of testing that belief. There are nights when the silence becomes too loud, when achievements and distractions no longer fill the emotional void, when they reach for their phone but realize there's no one they feel safe enough to call, or when someone enters their life who feels different, someone who awakens something in them they've worked hard to ignore. In these moments, the truth becomes harder to deny that despite all the armor, the longing to be seen, understood, and loved still exists. What's important to understand is that this realization doesn't usually come with joy, it often comes with grief. Grief over the years spent disconnected. Grief over missed opportunities for closeness. Grief over the relationships they've sabotaged, not out of malice, but out of fear. And in that grief, something softens. The internal resistance to connection starts to give way to a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, there's a different way to live and love. This doesn't mean they suddenly become emotionally fluent or eager for closeness, but it does mean they begin to question the narrative they've clung to. They start noticing the cost of their distance, not just the avoidance of pain, but the absence of joy, comfort, and shared life experiences. They begin to understand that vulnerability, while uncomfortable, is also the gateway to intimacy. That being known by another person is one of the most profound human experiences, and no amount of independence can replace it. Eventually, even avoidants come to realize that connection is not the enemy. It's what gives life depth, color, and meaning. The path to that realization may be long and uneven, but the need is universal. No matter how high the walls or how thick the armor, the heart still beats with the quiet hope of being met, understood, and loved. And that hope, even if buried, never truly dies. Thank you for listening with your heart open. Whether you see yourself in the avoidant or in the person loving them, I hope something in this message gave you clarity, comfort, or courage. Take what you need, leave what you don't. And remember, healing doesn't always happen loudly. Sometimes it begins in the quietest moments when we choose honesty over hiding, softness over strength, and love over the fear. Take care of yourselves and each other. Thank you. Goodbye for now.